I am Wietse Wind, and I am a software developer working full-time in the XRPL ecosystem, building software for the XRPL. And in my spare time, I love to play guitar. I have two wonderful kids, a lovely wife, and I'm enjoying all of this here in Amersfoort in the center of the Netherlands. When I was 9 years old, about 9 years old, I started to play around with hardware, some old computers. A teacher at school gathered from different companies, and I could build one working computer from 3 damaged ones, and usually it was partially hardware and software. So you had to fix MS-DOS, old operating systems, config files, stuff like that, which was very interesting to do. It's where I spent a lot of time on the attic at school. And if you're doing those kinds of things, you're constantly problem solving. And programming is basically that. So I was programming without even realizing it. I was making changes to files, installing stuff, solving problems. And it quickly turned into the realization that you can basically build anything on a computer. If you can think of it, you can build it with code you can type yourself. You just have to find out what to type. And well, that's a world of endless possibilities. And by age 10, I was basically spending all my spare time behind the computer playing with something code related. And at age 12, I was no longer sleeping at night. I built this small device in my house, the house where I live with my parents, where there was this infrared. I made this infrared gate. And I hid the cables, and then if they would come up the stairs late night, it would automatically shut down a relay in my room so my screens were off, which I learned 5 years ago that they just were fully aware of, but you just never said a thing. But yeah. Somewhere around 2011, I, like all developers, got the news, which was quite late by the way in 2011, got the news about Bitcoin, or I knew it existed, but I started to play around with it. Just on my living room computer, an old white iMac in the living room, and back then you just installed some software and it connected to the network, it synced up, blockchain wasn't that big, and you could exchange Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, which was very, very interesting and completely new to me and to everybody. And I was interested in it, but I used it to pay for Newsgroup access to download a couple of movies, like most people. I mined some Bitcoin on this iMac, which was still very, very easy to do, very low difficulty. And I didn't pay much attention to it, other than that it was interesting and I could use it to pay for newsgroups. A couple of years later, I realized that I still had this wallet with some Bitcoins, and I realized that there were $200 or something like that back then. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, it was free. I just mined that on the computer, sold everything, went on with my life. Because I didn't really see, I didn't have a vision about applying this technology in anything. Until in 2016, I saw a YouTube clip with David Schwartz presenting on a C++ conference. And he was talking about this technology they developed, which was blockchain, but it had a consensus algorithm. It was really fast, really efficient. It was different from what I saw when I checked out Bitcoin earlier. And I thought this is an interesting perspective, interesting technology, interesting implementation. And I want to look into this when I have time, because back then, 2016, I had a software business, system integration business, and I was still building that, bootstrapping that, increasingly successful, and well, too busy. So it was on the list, the long list, the growing list for things to look into. And then in 2017, 18, yeah, 17, my wife and I were expecting our first child, and I realized that I didn't want to be as busy as I was back then. I wanted to have a life with my family, and not a life where all time would be spent building this company. So I decided to take a couple of steps down, and suddenly I had spare time. And I picked the first thing on the list, and it was look into the XRPL. And 7 minutes later, 7 minutes after I started playing with the technology, I was connected to a public node from my browser console using technology available in all devices today, even back then, WebSockets. And I could locally sign a transaction, broadcast it to the network, and 4 seconds later, you had transaction finality. So using the technology that's available everywhere, fast, cheap, easy to use, using JavaScript in your browser console, and I realized that this technology, this XRP Ledger thingy, you can actually use that for consumer products, for retail, for anything I would like to use. So I guess there a hobby was born, which isn't a hobby anymore, by the way. It still is, but at the same time, it's also an actual business we're running. We are very blessed to have an office here in Amersfoort, in the middle of a park, which was actually quite coincidental that we ended up here. I was looking with my wife. My wife and I were looking for a house in Amersfoort. So of course you look where you want to be, and you make your decisions if you're expecting your first child based on your future with your children. So are there schools around? Are there supermarkets around? Are there outdoor places where your kids can play? And well, being next to a park makes a lot of sense then, which narrows the search down to a couple of locations in Amersfoort, and then add price, or like a house we could actually pay. And this is where we ended up. And it's a great neighborhood. And then we're in the middle of this park where we envisioned our children would be playing one day. So we took a walk, and we saw this old white building in the middle of the park. So I said to my wife, it was more like a joke, like, oh, that would be amazing if you can work in this park, in this building in the middle of the park. So we walked over to the building and we checked the door panel, the bell panel, and it had about 16 bells, doorbells for different companies. So it was one building, many companies in it. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'm just gonna send an email. I'm gonna find out in the land registry who owns this. I'm gonna find the building manager or the owner, and I'm just gonna send them an email. Like, if you ever have space, I wanna rent a room. So I sent the email, and they replied within a week, like, oh, well, a room just came available. Yeah, but it's the attic, and there's almost no daylight. And I thought, well, that's fine anyway, man. What do you need? If you're a software developer, attic works just fine. And then another 3 weeks later, they emailed, well, actually, another room came available, and it overlooks the entire park and the fields, and well, it's yours if you want it. So I said yes, of course. And I'm 5 minutes, a 5-minute walk from home now. And actually all the other employees, most of the other employees looked for their homes around this building as well. So we all take a stroll in the park or get on our bike, and a couple of minutes later we're here in the middle of a park building cutting-edge technology. We have a 16-headed team, XRPL Labs, and all different roles, of course. There's the UI, the user interface design. There's UX, user experience, two completely different things, related but different. There are, of course, the developers. Ali is building the app. Richard is doing all the stuff we can't even comprehend, like core on-ledger technology. I'm doing most of the backend. And then there are Dominique, Satish, Koen, more people building all the surrounding products, X-apps, integrations. There's, of course, partner business relations, which is becoming increasingly important because we have a really nice product and foundation now, so it's time for the next step. A compliance officer, that's when you know things are getting real. So, and the most important people, I would say, in the company are the support people, the support team, and they're located in Canada. And we're currently expanding to Japan for time zone coverage as well, and language, of course. So the team is slowly growing. It's a very moderate and contained and managed growth, because we all know what happens to companies if they grow too fast, and quality is the most important thing. When we're expanding the team, it doesn't really matter where you are. You can work from anywhere. You don't have to be here. We have video calls, and the different time zones are an upside, actually, because we can help people and interact with people in different time zones. But we won't be starting, or never say never, but we will probably not be opening new offices around the world. So, for example, right now we're interacting with a couple of people in Japan. They can work from home, or we can find them or support them renting a shared office space or something, whatever works for them. But we don't want the overhead of different buildings, companies to manage, locations to be at, travel. We just want to be lean and efficient and be able to allow people to work where they want to work, when they want to work. We also don't have holidays you have to stick to. We don't have a start or an end time, or even fixed days per employee. You're in when you're in, you're out when you're out. As long as you communicate with the people who need you at a given time, it's fine. And if you want to take a very long holiday, be my guest, come back recharged, and just go at it and build cool stuff. And this works out really well. Everybody, I mean, we're all passionate and responsible, and we love what we do. So we'll give 100% anyway. So then also take 100% freedom if you want it. The very first thing I developed for or on the XRP Ledger was the XRP Tipbot. It was just a proof of concept, just a simple message parser. I would fetch Reddit replies based on a mention and check for a specific syntax, plus something, mention someone, which was the Tipbot syntax. And I just wanted to play with that to see if how easy it was to build something, a backend system that would send off XRP on Ledger to another account based on an external trigger. And I built a couple of proof of concepts and published them for other developers to see and use. At which point, Vanessa Pestrito from Ripple, who was working there back then, reached out to me, and she said, would you like to keep on doing this, even if you have a family, if your baby is born? And I mean, you got to get your family something, right, to eat. What are your plans? And I hadn't really thought about it back then. I was still having fun. I took basically a sabbatical. And her question made me realize that I would very much love to do this full time and build actual products on the XRPL, products you can build a business around. And I saw some opportunities there, and I shared them with her, and she shared them with her team, and they gave me this amazing opportunity to build this small team and work on those products with a grant. And that's when Ali and Tristan come in. They're still here. They're doing this XRPL thing with us full time. And well, they were the first team members. The three of us worked out what today is Sum, what became Sum. And we started building. And then in 2018-19, that product actually went live with 80,000 users right at the beginning after a very successful beta pilot phase. When I was asked by Vanessa from Spring RippleX to think about what I would work on if I would do XRPL stuff full time, I immediately knew what it was going to be, because while developing on the XRPL and looking at the entire crypto space in general, actually, I realized that there was a huge component missing for future adoption beyond just speculation or holding crypto. Because if you look at how the exchange of value works in real life, so I'm talking retail or even friends and families sending each other or exchanging value, people are not initiating the sending of funds manually. If you go to a store, bricks and mortar or e-commerce, you want their products and they want your payment. So they are asking you to pay for something. You're not sending them payment. And this was actually a thing missing from the XRPL space, and actually still today a lot of blockchain wallets companies don't fully get this right, in my opinion. So we need pool payments. We need someone to be able to ask someone for a payment on Ledger, an on-ledger payment. And this requires a platform, some place where developers, e-commerce parties, beneficiaries, and end users can meet up. So I realized that, I mean, a better wallet, a nicer wallet would be great. A feature-complete XRPL wallet with a nice UI, I mean, that helps. But a wallet app is not enough. It needs a platform behind it. It needs to be a hub where developers, e-commerce, end users can all meet up and interact in a secure way. And also, if you look at development in the blockchain space, the hardest part is key management. Besides the entire technology, the cryptography and everything, if you're developing something blockchain related and you want end users to be able to use it, you need key management. This private key is the holy grail of your crypto account, your wallet, your assets. If someone obtains it, you lose everything, which means it's super important to get it right. And building very secure software, very good key management, it's the hardest thing you can do in this space as a developer. So you don't want all the developers to deal with that and to potentially make mistakes and to potentially compromise end users' funds. And you also don't want to teach users that it's okay to just take your private key and enter it somewhere. Because every time you type it, every time you enter it somewhere, you are entrusting yet another developer, another system, another code base with this secret that potentially compromises your savings. So all of this combined is what we felt the entire space needed and what became Sum. So to most users, Sum is just this app they get from the App Store and they install on their phone. But there's actually an entire platform behind it. There are a couple of thousand developers building on this platform, and users just go to a website, they scan a QR code, they swipe right, and they signed a transaction, they made a trade, they obtained an asset. But there's an entire ecosystem and there's infrastructure behind that making all of that possible, while we do the key management. We do the hardest part. We keep your keys safe on your phone. Oh, and we provide support and everything, but what it comes down to is to allow developers to do what they're good at, and it's build new stuff, be creative, and we'll do the hard part, the key custody, the end user interaction, and allowing them to meet up on this platform with end users. So you can use Sum and the XRP Ledger today for payments anywhere, as long as there's someone willing to accept your payment on the XRP Ledger. And there are places in the Netherlands, in Europe, around the world, where people actually do want to receive their payments on the XRP Ledger, either as a stablecoin or XRP, because they want to speculate a little bit. I don't know where these businesses and people are exactly, because there's not a directory where you can just find all the businesses willing to accept cryptocurrency, or there are some lists, but it's pretty scattered and it's pretty rare. So you get the enthusiasts, you get the hobbyists, you get the early adopters who own a small business or a store who are willing to receive their funds on Ledger. I wouldn't know where to go if you want to spend today from Sum, except if I would check my Twitter history, because every now and then, every week, month, someone reaches out with pictures or video material showcasing Sum for actual payments. I saw a video from, I think it was someone in Thailand, who rented a co-working space paying with Sum. Awesome video. A couple of meetups where you could pay for the drinks with XRP, of course. I know there are a couple of arts and crafts stores where you can pay with XRP. So I know some individual examples, but I wouldn't know where you can find a list of stores actually accepting Sum. But I mean, anyone can. Just install the app and decide that you're willing to receive anything on the XRP Ledger. I mean, it's good money. It's actual funds in your account no one can touch unless if you want to touch it. So you're an end user and you have this app installed on your phone to interact with the XRP Ledger. Where is the XRP Ledger? Where is the XRP? Or you're a developer and you're interacting with the XRP Ledger to submit transactions and fetch transaction results. Or you're a user who wants to check their trust lines and their balances. This XRP ledger, where does it live? I mean, we all know it's decentralized and on the internet. But what is that? At the end of the day, the XRP ledger is made of a whole bunch of nodes. And these nodes, there are servers or computers. Servers are basically computers, but then configured to run full time at high capacity. And these servers, these nodes, they run all around the world. But how does your phone know, how does some know where to reach out to? Well, it doesn't really. We tell the application where to connect to. Like a developer would make a connection to a node, and then they can query the XRPL, and then they can check balances and submit transactions. So, as you can imagine, these endpoints, these nodes you actually get to connect to, they need to be highly available, and they need to be able to handle a lot of simultaneous connections, which is quite hard to do. One machine cannot do that. We have had a couple of peaks in the past with over 30,000 simultaneous connections, actively querying the ledger. I mean, 100,000 simultaneous connections is manageable if they're idle. But if you have 30,000 users who are checking their balances, submitting transactions, checking their history, adding trust lines, that's a lot of load. You don't need 1 or 2 or 3 machines, you need a whole cluster of machines. And these machines are very expensive. They need the best of the best hardware. Now, Ripple provides one of those clusters, free of charge for the world. It's a public cluster. But just having Ripple run one cluster, that's not really decentralization. It's also not what you want. You want to have options to choose from, and we can also not ask users to run their own node. It's hard. They definitely don't know how to install. It's not efficient. And you're on the road. You're on 5G somewhere. You want to check your balance, right? So you don't want your computer at home to be on for that. So you need clusters. You need endpoints to connect to the XRPL, basically your gateway into the decentralized XRP ledger. And being the people behind Sum, we are responsible for most of the traffic, actually. Because those 30,000 connections, it's safe to say that, for example, 25,000 of those connections came from our software product. So we feel a responsibility to contribute there. So we needed more hardware, more bare metal, more nodes, more infrastructure, better internet connections, more machinery, more electricity, all of that to run these machines. And that's very expensive. So that's somewhere last year, 2021, when the network was going absolutely crazy with everybody going on their trust line frenzy and getting assets and trading them. The network had a very hard time, or some of the network was still going on, but it was just very hard to get in, to connect to one of the public nodes. So that's when I called upon the XRPL community and asked them to contribute to the health of the network, basically. You will be provided with access to the network anyway, but please, if you have some money to spare, please help out. We'll provide the hands, we'll install them, we'll manage them, we'll maintain them. But allow us to buy more machinery, install it, plug it in, and make sure that the XRPL is available for all. And a lot of users contributed, way more than we ever expected. To the point where we were able to scale the amount of nodes from, I believe there were 8 back in the day, to over 35 now. Partially because of community contributions, partially because the XRP Ledger Foundation and other community members, individuals, actually contribute. But whenever we're going to see another uptick in traffic, I am very confident that we can do a lot more than 30,000 connections. A very interesting trait of the XRP Ledger is that a lot of the features are implemented natively on Ledger. So you don't need smart contracts for most of the things we're using today, or any of the things, because the XRPL currently doesn't have smart contracts. So if you look at, for example, Ethereum EVM-based chains, if you're talking about issued assets, tokens, they are a smart contract. On the XRP Ledger, this is handled way more efficiently, they are native issued currencies. And to be able to hold a specific asset, a token on the XRPL other than the native asset XRP, you need a trust line. And a trust line originally comes from the way token issuing was intended on the XRPL, which is as an IOU. So let's say I give you 10 euros and you issue those 10 euros to me on the ledger. So now on ledger, I don't own 10 euros, I own your obligation of 10 euros to me. And if I'm lucky, one day I will send back those 10 euros on ledger to you, we clear out your obligation, and you release the real 10 euros back to me, physically, in my hands, or to my bank account, or whatever. I am only willing to receive those 10 euros from you, the obligation, if I trust you. Because if one day I'm going to give back the 10 ledger euros to you and you're not going to, and I don't trust you to give me back the physical euros, why would I hold the euros on ledger from you? It's based on trust. And this is called a trust line on the XRP ledger, where first I have to explicitly opt in to holding your IOU, and then you can send it to me. It's based on trust. Now, this technology, this implementation can be used for other things than just IOUs. You can also use it to just natively issue an asset. And then you make sure that on ledger there is proof that you cannot issue, for example, you cannot issue more of the asset, which is called black holing. You just make sure that you can no longer access the account and you have on ledger proof that that's true. And then you can consider it an issued currency, but under the hood it's still an IOU, except you don't owe me anything, I just have the asset. And I'm willing to accept that it is its own asset. I would still need to trust you as the issuer. And there's a nice advantage there. If you look on any Ethereum or EVM like Explorer, any network, you see a lot of spam, where people send random assets, shitcoins to issuers, to users hoping that they will buy more of it. And some people got really rich off that because a project caught on, but most of it is just bullshit. This cannot happen on the XRPL because you cannot just send an asset to a random stranger. They first have to opt in with a trust line to hold the asset. So the first thing we focused on for years actually when building Sum and the entire ecosystem around Sum and the XRPL was focused on code, application, working product for end users, for developers. And that's all contained in this blockchain space, right? You can check your balance, you can send your assets, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be user-friendly. But at the end of the day, the XRP ledger or the entire cryptocurrency space is pretty self-contained. In this big world of traditional finance, we get paid in euros or dollars or any asset we accept as our native currency in the place we live. And then there's the XRP ledger, and it has XRP and other assets. And there needs to be an efficient way to move between those networks, which is called on and off ramp. It's basically depositing your fiat to somewhere and then turning that into blockchain money and vice versa. So this can be as a stable coin, or you want to convert it straight to a cryptocurrency. And without the interoperability between those two worlds, we have islands, and we will never be able to expand what we're building to the real world around us. It's just very hard today, and it's either very hard or very expensive to take your fiat and turn it into crypto, or to take your crypto and turn it into fiat. It's either very expensive because you're using a user-friendly custodian. We all know them. You just download an app, you onboard, and then you can use your credit card to pay some crypto. And then later you check the price of that cryptocurrency on a random website, and then you check your app, what you paid, and you realize that you paid a 5 or 10% premium, right? Partially because these companies have a lot of fees to pay, credit card fees and everything, but also partially just because they want to make a lot of profit. So that's user-friendly but expensive. Alternatively, you can do it the hard way. You can take your fiat, you send it to an exchange where you register an account, and you go to the trading component on the exchange website, you exchange your fiat for the cryptocurrency, then you go to the withdrawal page, and then you withdraw the cryptocurrency to your own ledger account, your R address in case of the XRP ledger that you may or may not manage with some or any other wallet. Hard, but you get good spot prices on the exchange from the order book. And we feel that to expand the ecosystem and to grow what we're doing, we need to find a sweet spot between these two not really good options, basically. We want user-friendly, we want non-custodial, and we want good prices. And we looked and we looked and we talked, and we just cannot do that through partners. Exchanges are perfectly fine doing their business as they're doing. The other companies, like the easy on and off-ramp companies, they make a lot of fees and they love to make that money, which, I mean, I can't blame them. And then you have the on and off-ramp partners. They're specialized in doing exactly this, taking fiat, turning it into crypto and vice versa. And they have fees as well, a lot of fees. Makes sense. Again, you can't blame them because it's expensive to do your customer due diligence, to do your AML responsibilities well, to pay the credit card fees or whatever fees you have to pay to Visa, MasterCard, because you want to get the fiat in. So that's all not going to work. We will add a couple of those partners, by the way, in the near future, because there's just demand and something is better than nothing. But we realized that if we want to do this right, not because we want to make a lot of profit, but because we feel this is needed for whatever we're going after next, adoption, we need to do this ourselves. So we realized that we have to do the one thing nobody wants to do or can do because it's very hard and expensive. We need to get our own licenses. We need to start to provide financial services, which is regulated and which comes with a lot of obligations, and which is a completely different game than the software game we're playing. And I mean, we're good at building software and security and maybe support. This is a completely different game. So, almost 2 years after this realization, we are finally live with our first implementation here in the Netherlands, where we have got the green light from the regulator in the Netherlands to provide on and off-ramp services ourselves, which means that users onboard with us and they already trust us with their private key, which stays in their device because it's non-custodial. And some of them already trust us with KYC information for add-on services or for a basically trustworthy flag. But now they can trust us with their on and off-ramp as well. And that's an amazing step. And of course, this was very hard to do all the compliance stuff, to get the registration with the regulator, to then implement everything we promised to do and are obliged to do into our internal systems and procedures. But now we can roll out to other countries. So now we're first going to cover Europe, one country at a time. So we are now live in the Netherlands. It gives us the perfect playing ground to learn, improve, make this even more efficient, see what works, work with our users in our own language, and make sure it's absolutely perfect for a rollout next to hopefully Germany, Belgium, the UK, and then expand throughout Europe, which is easy because it uses the same payment rails. And then after that, we're going to look where we'll be next. Maybe African countries, maybe Asia, maybe LATAM, and probably not the US for any time soon with the current landscape in the US. But that's of course where partners come in who know what to do in those jurisdictions. And then we can still work with those partners to integrate their on and off ramp workflow in our product. So it's still one app, one place you go to, one environment where you go through the process from onboarding, on-ramping, close, hey, my balance is already updated. So it's still way more efficient than what people are doing today. One of the things you keep on reading and seeing on Twitter, social media, public discussions about the XRP ledger is how it doesn't have smart contracts. And I would say for most use cases, it's actually a good thing that the XRPL doesn't have smart contracts, because features are implemented natively, which means they're fast, they're efficient, they're well documented. And getting the features onto the ledger in a good way has to go through consensus. People have to vote on it, and you cannot just create anything and put bloat on the ledger. And also, the ledger is known for being very efficient when it comes to a transaction finality under 4 seconds, when it comes to fees, fraction of a penny, when it comes to transaction throughput. And you want to keep it that way, and you don't want to compromise that. So originally I felt that not having smart contracts was actually the best thing. And then at some point I realized a couple of things when it comes to smart contracts. One, innovation happens where people don't have limitations. So innovation happens on networks with, for example, EVM, because whatever isn't there, whatever isn't on the chain, if they can think of it, again, they can build it. You get this big box of Legos and you start to build whatever you like, which is amazing. And a lot of good things came from that, right? A lot of the blockchain innovation today happened because people started building random stuff as smart contracts. And it takes time for an idea like that to reproduce it in native code and implement that as an amendment and allow people to vote on it and get it live on the XRPL, which means the XRPL is always playing catch up when it comes to new features. Which is, again, partially good and partially a shame because you don't get the innovation. A bigger problem is that if you look at blockchain today, we are going to need a lot of features that are going to take a long time to implement natively, and they wouldn't be as flexible as you want them to be if you implement them natively. Because if you want to make any change, you have to code it, you have to thoroughly test it, turn it into amendment, get it through consensus, vote on it, and as they should, network participants are very careful when it comes to voting in new features. So if you look at blockchain today, still an island, and the real world, the global world of finance and fund management and there needs to be interaction between those two worlds. A very good example is today's problem with key management. If you lose your private key, your funds are gone. If you lose your private key to someone else, they can steal all your funds and nothing can stop it and nothing can revert it, which is amazing, which is how you want it to be because your funds are really yours, but at the same time, it doesn't work. If we want retail adoption, if we want everybody, if we want my grandmother and mother and nephew, if we want everybody to use the XRP ledger or any blockchain technology for their everyday commerce, for their loyalty points, for their collectibles, for their access to a concert, for anything, we cannot tell them that they no longer get into the concert because they don't have their private key anymore. We cannot tell them that they lose their pension because they forgot to set up multi-signing backup keys and they lost their private key because their house burned down and with that their entire pension. It just doesn't work. So what we have built today to take that to the next level, to implement this technology in real life, we need features that are not going to be natively available for quite some time when it comes to programmatically allowing for key recovery, for example. So I realized that we do need some programmability on the XRP ledger. And you could say that that's smart contracts, programmability on ledger, a layer 1 solution. But I do think that we can do a lot of things more efficiently and keep it more compact than today's smart contract solutions, which is why we started to work on hooks. And Richard, one of the brilliant people at XRPL Labs, I mean, I don't understand the things he shares with me. So he's another level. He's on another level. And he had some thoughts about how smart contracts on the XRPL could work. I had some thoughts as well. We started to discuss those because he was part of the XRPL community. Well, he's the original developer of Toast Wallet. A lot of people used it back in the days. And we discussed this, had a lot of chats about this, and we realized that we wanted to work on this together, which is actually when he moved from New Zealand to the Netherlands and now lives here in Amersfoort and works with us here in this office. And he built 99.9% of Hooks, and Hooks, the smart contract solution for the XRPL, keeping the XRPL as fast, as cheap as it always has been, but allowing for your own custom logic on Ledger, exists today. There's a public testnet and developers are actively working with it. So this is not some vision that we might or may not realize. It exists today and we still have a lot to do, but it is coming. So if you want to program hooks, smart contracts for the XRP Ledger, you can do so in basically any language. Hooks are WebAssembly binaries, and WebAssembly is you can compile to WebAssembly from almost any programming language. Now we chose to be the first language for hooks development to be C, which is a very efficient language. It's already a compiled language. So we take the C code, we compile that to WebAssembly, and then we allow the WebAssembly to be installed on the XRP Ledger and run as a smart contract. But a lot of programming languages can compile to WebAssembly. It became the industry standard in only a couple of years for very fast, very efficient, very lightweight code execution, sandboxed code execution, which is what you want. You want it to be very fast, you want it to be very small, you want to be able to run it in microseconds, and you want it to be sandboxed, because none of what you do in your smart contract can escape to the rest of the ledger, to the hosts the code is running on. And you still want to be able to handle hundreds of transactions per second, even if they all come with their own custom logic. So WebAssembly was the right choice, and there are a lot of big parties around the world investing a lot of time and energy in WebAssembly development because it seems to became the industry standard also for cloud and edge computing. So I think that's the right choice to make today if you're doing anything with smart contracts. Also because it doesn't even matter in what language people program. I mean, you still have to build the toolkit around it. But anyone can do that and basically map their own local programming language to operations for hooks on the XRP Ledger. So it's C today. We're working on WebAssembly currently to allow a JavaScript, TypeScript-like syntax to be turned into hooks, which is what 90% of the developers work with anyway. It's a great language to add support for. But if Go or Rust or any language can be mapped to hooks. So that's going to be very interesting to see what people build. And I would very much like to see over time when the test cases are there, when the code audits have been there, when we have a working example with AssemblyScript. So that's months or even years down the road. But I would very much like to see some grants in the future for developers to build their own hooks layers for other programming languages. For 99% of all smart contract use cases we see today, you can do exactly what you do with EVM, but then with hooks. And I think hooks are more efficient in many ways. But there are a couple of limitations, obviously, because we prioritize forward progress, transaction speed, low fees and everything over complete freedom when you're developing something. So the hooks are heavily built in advance based on the computation, the worst case execution, basically, of a hook. So there's an incentive to write efficient hooks. And then storing data on Ledger is also relatively expensive in hooks. So you can work with all the data at your disposal on Ledger, But if you want to commit your custom data to the ledger, it's going to be quite expensive. For example, if you want to keep track of accounts, you want to make a list of accounts, you can do that in your Hook, you can store that, but it's quite expensive. But for enterprise solutions or for key recovery solutions, it makes perfect sense to allocate some funds for the add-on features you get. And hooks can execute only at the start of a transaction or at the end of a transaction. So it's either when a transaction is initialized, that's when you can programmatically still say, I don't want this transaction, for example, and it's not going to enter your account or it's not going to leave your account. Very important feature. The other stage is after the transaction. If the transaction went through consensus, if the transaction is okay, you may want to execute add-on logic to do something based on what happened in this transaction. Really simple example, you got a deposit of 1000 XRP and you want to route it partially to your savings account, small part to a carbon offset account, and you want to keep the rest in your account but turn it into a stablecoin, for example, retail use case. So you can do that after the transaction happened. And we have gone through a lot of different use cases we're going after ourselves, use cases where we see other developers going after, and we think hooks can cater all of them. Of course, we don't know what we don't know, so people are going to come up with things, and we're going to have this creative process again where we might have to revisit some things. But the one thing where I think hooks are maybe not the go-to environment, smart contract execution sandbox, is the typical DeFi stuff that's happening. If you look at, for example, decentralized exchange, token issuing, AMMs, stuff like that, it's quite inefficient to use hooks. Now, on EVM networks, the only way to implement it is through smart contracts. On the XRPL, I think those clear use cases, they just should be implemented natively. Don't write smart contracts for them. Unless if you want to pilot something and basically build the spec of what's going to be implemented natively later. We've recently seen a lot of news and hype and enthusiasm about the release of native NFTs, aka the XLS20 amendment on the XRP ledger. And some people might think it's related to smart contracts and hooks. It is not. I understand where people are coming from because NFTs on other networks are implemented through smart contracts. And on the XRPL, like many awesome features as the DEX or multi-signing, they are native to the XRP ledger. So XLS20 is a proposal, or started as a draft proposal of bringing native NFT functionality to the XRP ledger. So it's not draft anymore, it is a full-blown amendment, and it's now being voted on by network participants. It doesn't need hooks, it's native functionality. It does play very nice with hooks, because maybe you want to add your own custom logic to NFTs as well. The NFT can be anything. It can be your access to a concert, it can be a collectible, it can be an attestation to proof of your identity. It can be anything. It's just a blank object on the ledger you own that represents something. And we have a social contract on what it represents, basically. Now, it makes a lot of sense to do what hooks can offer, pre-transaction execution logic and post-transaction commit logic. With NFTs, for example, maybe you have your own conditions why you don't or do want to receive an NFT. Maybe you have your own conditions or logic that has to be executed after you send or mint an NFT. Maybe for every NFT you sell, again, concert ticket example, or no, better example, properties, houses, land registry. Maybe after selling a property being represented as an NFT, you automatically want to transfer funds from the account to, for example, the notary for their services, to the realtor for their services, to the land registry for the registration fee to transfer the deed into your name. So all of those things you can now do programmatically, verifiably on Ledger with hooks. So they play nice together. Now, NFTs, smart NFTs on the XRPL today on mainnet are not a real thing. it's still on DevNet, but on mainnet, people, validator operators are voting on the amendment. And we already had the amendment lock-in at over 80% of the votes a couple of weeks back, until a very smart developer found a feature that could be exploited. So it wasn't really a bug in the source code, in the amendment. It was a perfectly fine feature, but it could be abused by an attacker to lock up unrecoverable funds by someone minting or selling an NFT, which is not something you want, because in this global ecosystem, it's not if this is going to be abused, it's when it's going to be abused. And you could say that someone didn't configure their on-ledger account settings well if this were to be abused, because you could prevent it by one simple flag, by not enabling the flag when you minted the NFT or when you when you wanted to sell the NFT. But we all know that people are not reading the docs. They are going to turn on the flag because they like the feature, and then at some point they are going to be a victim of someone just locking their funds for sports. So the flag had to be removed. So that resulted in an updated amendment, and the voting process started again from scratch. And we're closing in on a lock-in of the amendment again, but there's no telling when that's going to happen, because we don't know who's going to vote when on a decentralized network. And we also don't know if maybe something else comes up. I hope not, I think not, but who knows? That's what we thought 3 weeks ago. But if all goes as planned, I think we can see XLS 20 NFTs natively on the XRPL in a couple of weeks. In the short term, we are very busy at XRPL Labs with a lot of projects, by the way, but our focus for the next 6 months will be rolling out our on and off ramp services to more European countries, and let's see where we end up next. Meanwhile, we're working on hopefully some retail integrations, because we think we're ready for the next step. We have a great foundation, and now we should look for actual payment use cases, payment service providers maybe, in the world around us. And we're working on hooks, getting hooks to the level where it can become an amendment and more developers can work with it. And in the meantime, we are also working on a complete redesign of the application, which is a very, very tricky project, because we want to keep the look and feel people are used to. You don't want to make too big of a change, because you're just going to scare everybody. They trusted their funds, their private key to your software product, and then suddenly everything changed. So that doesn't work. But at the same time, if we want to take the next step to retail use cases, we also need to turn I would say, well-designed crypto space user interface to an interface that also plays well with the big retail space, where even terminology is probably going to have to change, because we're talking about tokens and NFTs. But what are tokens and NFTs to my mother or my grandmother or my neighbors? They're abstract things, and you have to explain them. That doesn't work well. So we have a lot of internal discussions as well about should we call them assets or balances, or instead of tokens. And NFTs, what are they? Are they deeds? Well, they're not always deeds. They can be a concert ticket, not really a deed. Are they certificates? No, they don't have to be certificates. Are they titles? You have a title to something. So it's very tricky. It's taxonomy and a lot of discussions there. But we're gonna do some controversial things there, I would say, in the short term. Medium term, I think we will see integrations with, for example, payment service providers and bigger e-commerce players, so people can actually use their non-custodial funds for payments. Also, medium term, I think you will see some of the interesting things where the real life and problems solved in real life around us will meet blockchain technology. Key management, for example, is something. We have notaries and lawyers, and they are allowed to deal with a certain type of transactions in real life. They have licenses to deal with things like inheritance and funds, and the recovery of documents if you lose the documents that prove that you own a piece of land or an object, a house. Why not apply those things to the blockchain space? Why not bring those two together with a smart contract on-chain and all the existing social contracts off-chain? So we are going to do a couple of very interesting things there. Long term, I feel that the only right play is to keep things non-custodial but compliant, make it really user-friendly, suitable for retail adoption as well, and offer it as a complete alternative payment rails to everything we already have, which means bridging at first and probably forever, because these two worlds are going to coexist. They already do. But you use one payment rails for one thing, and then for other payments or exchange of value, you have a more efficient rails. They can and they should coexist. And I think our long-term goal would be to really position the XRPL as that other payment rails where the XRPL often offers efficiency to things that the existing payment rails don't really offer. And there are plenty of use cases where it's very obvious that there is something to offer. Think remittance fees, of course, peer-to-peer. Think micropayments. Also, if you look at the today's payment costs, and the consumer doesn't notice because the consumer just swipes or taps their card and they paid the exact price that they see on the label for the product they want to pay. But the retailer is hurting because the retailer is paying the payment service provider for the transaction. They're paying the credit card company a couple of % for the transaction. They're paying their bank for the deposit of those funds obtained from the end user through the credit card company. And then add currency conversion because you're from the US and you're now visiting Europe and you just want to get a cup of coffee with your credit card, and it becomes even worse. You get a 5%, 10% markup on your currency exchange. That can be much more efficient. And micropayments, I'm talking everything below €5, for example. The payment costs today hurt there, and the retailer can save money. And if the retailer can save money and convince the end user through, for example, loyalty points or giving them something extra to save them their transaction fees, I think there's an incentive for everybody to try this new payment rails. If the new payment rails doesn't add all these pains of onboarding and losing all you own on-chain if you lose your keys. So our short and medium-term goals will help us to go after this long-term goal. And yeah, I like to think that we're right on track going after all these things. So my answer is going to be very useless because if either I don't know, and I'm going to say I don't know, or he is or isn't, and I don't know, I'm still going to say I don't know, or he is, and I'm still going to say I don't know. So I don't know. Thank you, Crypto Channel. Thank you, XRP community. Thank you, all our users, all developers working with us, helping us, and cheering for us. And I hope you learned something today. I'm Wietse from XRPL Labs. We're building some, and we'd love to keep you as a user for the rest of your life.